It's awesome to have you back on, and we don't need to do the usual of kind of diving in too much into your history. I don't know if we covered it before, but I guess we could probably start off the same way that I always do, which is to just ask, what was it that made you pick up a camera in the first place?
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, thanks for having me back. It's always a pleasure. And, especially some of your guests so far, it's a real pleasure to be a part of that. So thank you. Camera, right. So I had no interest in photography until probably around about 7 years ago. It all started on honeymoon, me and my wife and my oldest, and we had a really shitty little point and click. And we were just devastated with the quality of the photos. Our first holiday abroad with our oldest. And we just said we were going to forego Christmas presents that year and get a decent camera. And that's really where it started. Much like any bloke, I'm obsessed with gadgets, especially gadgets that you can modify, take bits off and kind of improve with putting different bits on it, much like a modern DSLR or any other DSLR. And it kind of grew from there. Really just taking pictures of the family as our family grew and developed, to be honest with you, Kris. That's kind of the start. Had no interest in shooting people. I was probably quite petrified of shooting people, actually. The idea of taking someone's portrait terrified me. So it was very much landscapes after that. And from there, it developed once I joined a camera club. That was where I had my first taste of taking someone's portrait.
Yeah, I mean, your experience with the camera club from our conversations previously definitely sounds a lot more positive than my experience with the camera club, which is, not really saying much. But yeah, I mean, obviously I've known you now for, I don't know, it feels like about 5 years. It definitely feels like in the last sort of 18 months, and especially considering what the last 12 months has been like, it feels like in the last 18 months, your portraiture has just jumped like 10 levels. You have some images that I'm more than happy if you don't want them to put in my portfolio. What's been the catalyst for that improvement? What's kind of helped you jump through the gears the way you have?
Do you know, it's funny you say that because I don't feel that that's happened. For me, I think I reached a certain limit with my editing and what I was doing with a camera. And I would say the biggest change for me is I've not mastered photography in any way, shape or form. I've not mastered portraiture. I feel like every day is a learning day. I actually think that I've mastered my equipment. And that might sound like a really technical answer, but 18 months ago, a lot of my concentration during a shoot was making sure that my camera settings were right. For example, going to a studio day or a workshop and shooting the whole day in JPEG, for example. Things like that might have been where my main sort of concentration and focus was. And I would say the biggest change for me in the last 12 to 18 months is I don't think about what my camera's doing now. I have every confidence that it's doing what it's supposed to do, and I've set it the way I need to. So it's really enabled me to focus on, I think, my consistency. I would say is probably my biggest improvement. And that's purely been enabled by knowing my kit better than I did 2 years ago.
And is that down to primarily you not changing gear at a tremendous rate? Like obviously now we're in the age where, I think Sony brings out a camera every 11 minutes, Fuji about every 14 minutes, Canon every 4 or 5 decades. Is it the case that because you've kind of stuck with the gear that you've got and you found like your rut with it, like you found your groove with it, it's allowed you to focus more and more away from the gear?
Completely, yeah. So I've got my camera, a Nikon D810 in, I want to say autumn 2018. So a little over 2 years ago. And yeah, the first year was most certainly still just learning the camera, to be honest with you. And now I don't feel like I need to do that at all. I don't have any intention to change the camera either. It's still doing phenomenal work. There may be the occasional acquisition of lenses, but I've not bought a lens in about the same amount of time, to be honest with you. So I'm quite confident with my kit. And the only sort of major addition to my kit in the last 12 months has actually been some mobile lighting to take on location. And the difference of introducing that new feature to my workflow, I certainly noticed that in the first half a dozen shots, it took a while because it had disrupted my flow. So the first few examples with that mobile light weren't my best work in any way, shape or form. But the more confident I get with using it and, integrating it into my workflow, I feel that I've rebuilt that consistency with it.
Do you feel like you're finding your voice as well in terms of like directing? Because I think that's something that takes a lot of people a really long time, is to find who they are and a way to kind of project that into a shoot. Because like what you want to get from a shoot is one thing, and then your personality might lead it down a completely different route. I suffer with that tremendously, especially with weddings. And it's taken me a long time to work through that. Is that something you feel like you've become more comfortable with?
Definitely. In fact, it's funny you mention it. The first time I met you was one of your workshops in 2018. And the difference in me as an individual or as a photographer from that day to now is I don't puke when a model talks to me like that kid off South Park. So that's kind of like a big change. The point that I met you, I'd only done probably, I think, 2 or 3 model shoots. So working with yourself and the model on that day, quite honestly, I was shaking like a shitting dog. And over the last 2 years, that's really kind of built up, and my confidence talking to models, male and female, and offering direction has definitely changed. And even that feels like it's been a relatively recent development that I felt confident enough to have that level of input with models. Certainly in the last 12 months, definitely.
And in terms of I don't do gear really. I don't really, to me, and this is kind of a thing I've stuck by. I think, I used to play a lot of guitar. When I used to work in a kitchen, I work with a camera, always the same way. In my mind, the mentality should be, which is that I just want the equipment to get out of the way, like to be as unintrusive as possible for me to be able to do what I want to do with it, where I'm not having to faff with it. I'm not having to fuck about with whatever I would normally have to. I want to kind of become literate, like you were kind of alluding to earlier with the gear. So I don't really talk about gear an awful lot. And it's something that there's one guy in particular that tends to message me about once a week to complain about. So this is just for him, I guess. But what is especially your outdoor portraits? Like, I'm loving your natural light portraits. What is your outdoor portrait gear setup in terms of like lenses and that?
I use my main digital body, which is a Nikon D810, and I only take 2 lenses out. So I use the Nikon 24-70 2.8, which is a really interesting one. I'll come back to that in a minute. And the 85mm 1.8 by Nikon as well. They're the only ones that I take out on a shoot. I've never needed anything else. I have got a 50mm, but I just don't find it as powerful, actually. And more recently, I've been spending more time with the 24-70 than I have the 85, which is a complete reversal of where I was, again, 12 months ago. I've started to experiment a little bit more with the focal length of around 35 to 40mm. And I've noticed that that's made a big change in some of my images. But it's interesting that, as you and I sit here today, that's the one that I've probably used most in the last 6 months to a year. I remember speaking with you a year or so ago where I said I'd never really used that lens. It was very much vanilla and very much something that is just in the bag but collects dust mostly. And it's interesting that as I've developed and found more of a consistency, I'm relying on that lens a hell of a lot more.
And one thing that's kind of stuck with me recently, I've done a bit of a purge on my old hard drives and found old RAW files to go through, because not able to go out and shoot. And even if you were legally allowed to do it in England, the weather's not exactly wonderful right now.
No.
I think I actually spoke on a previous podcast about the couple of endeavors I've made into shooting over the last couple of months, and they've not exactly been successful. But one thing that kind of going through the old RAW files has shown me is that we don't constantly improve. Like, the amount of time you've been doing something is so often quoted by photographers. Like, I've been a photographer for 15 years, or I've been a photographer for 6 years or 10 years or whatever, as if that's the barometer for how good you are. And what I've actually realized is that there was a sweet spot for me around 2016, 2017, where I'd learned enough to be literate, but I knew little enough to be dangerous. And I was doing some stuff that my hit rate was low, but when it worked, it really worked. And something that I've kind of realized is that maybe I've plateaued a little bit over the last couple of years when it comes to portraiture, purely from being safe and taking safe shots and going down the safe route of coming out from a shoot with, a guaranteed end product that is, maybe in what I'm capable of, a 7 out of 10. Whereas I should be perhaps pushing myself to shoot a lot of 4s, but with the opportunity for a 9 or a 10 and to sort of take that next step up. I feel like I've become too safe. How do you feel about your progress? Do you feel like you're still on the upward curve?
No, I recognize exactly what you've just described, to be honest. But I think I plateaued. I feel like I plateaued with my editing a while ago, and not. That's not me saying that I've kind of reached a level that I'm happy with my editing. Far from it. I always look at my work almost curious as whether it's good enough. I'm my own biggest critic. I'm paranoid very much about the quality of it compared to other people. And I'm always curious, like, how do people get these results that I consider, so much more impressive than the work that I'm doing? I just haven't broken through the next level yet. There is, you and I have touched on it previously, that getting to the next level is harder. You're adding more skill into your workflow, whether it's in the actual capture of the image or the editing. And I'm just not on the next level yet. And so I'm kind of on that step, waiting for a way to get up onto the next step. I do think the consistency of my work has improved though. And I think that's enabled me to be a little bit more experimental with how I capture images. So there's a period of time where every image that I would have shot would have probably been a half body portrait outdoors with an 85mm lens. Now I'm being a little bit more creative in terms of the angles that I use, the focal length. As I'm doing a lot more between 35 and 40mm at the moment. And I'm really enjoying some of the results that I'm getting with that. I've started to introduce outdoor light rather than just relying on natural light. But the hard part of that is knowing when to use it, when's appropriate, when isn't, because just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And that's trying to curb your own enthusiasm and recognizing when that has been a big part of the last 12 months with my images as well. But certainly from an editing point of view, I feel like I'm kind of stuck at the moment. There's the next skill level up, which I'm just not there at yet.
I mean, you use a phrase there, which I think is really interesting, which is to kind of curb the enthusiasm. And in the past, when I've been asked questions on workshops like the one you attended, or in general, in conversations with friends or workshop attendees or whoever, I've been asked questions about potential ways to improve. I feel like one way for a lot of people is to kind of cut the emotional ties with the dead wood in a portfolio. That's a big step. It's a really hard step to take. It's something I struggle with. But the one that I get sort of the least response out of, or the least positive response out of, is when I do tell people to kind of stop enjoying photography so much. In the sense that, like, it's good obviously to enjoy what we do, and I'm someone that massively enjoys photography in general. As tough as this year has been, this month has been, this week has been, I decided this week I'm going to stick a roll of HP5 in an old Canon A1 and follow my dog around shooting it at 3200 and see what that comes out like when I develop it in all different lighting conditions. So I'm someone that really does enjoy photography, but I feel like a problem for people that are sort of in their formative years as a photographer is that they enjoy it too much. So they kind of do a bit of everything and they don't really learn to focus themselves up. Well, that's what I was going to ask you is do you feel like the next step for you is to kind of focus up a little bit more? Absolutely.
So over the last couple of years, I've kind of done a little bit of everything, and away from the portraiture and the fashion side of it, I've done the odd little bit of commercial work here and there, which has given me new skills and shown me different ways of having to work on your feet, think quickly, in terms of how you manage the camera, especially, for example, indoor events where you've got poor lighting conditions, or if you're photographing, I don't know, animals for a zoo, for example, small animals like frogs, how do you get the best images from that, making sure that you have the right kit with you. But just remembering that you don't have to do that all the time. I do enjoy landscapes, but if there's an opportunity to photograph anything that's different, I will always jump on it. And I think more than anything, for me, I think it's a case of I just kind of need to prove to myself that I can do it. And the biggest change I would say in my portfolio is I'm not putting that in my portfolio anymore. Whereas maybe 12, 18 months ago, you would have seen everything on there. So for example, my Instagram page would have had drag racing cars in it or aircraft or something, as well as everything else. It would just look completely jumbled up because I would just post everything. And I'm a lot more selective now about the work that I actually share. I still do the things that I enjoy, but that's for my enjoyment. And that's been the biggest kind of separation in my work in the last 2 years, I would say.
Well, do you feel like the filtering of what you're putting out is more important? So obviously what I was kind of getting at there was with a lot of people that I talk to who, especially the ones that are looking to kind of take it into a career, which is an entirely different conversation in itself. Mm-hmm. But the people that want to be, recognized for what they do, my argument is we'll stop doing so much stuff so that people can kind of finitely figure out what it is that you do. What you're saying is kind of, you can still enjoy all of those things, but maybe they just don't make publication for other people to see. And you can just take the experience for what it is without constantly chasing attention for the work that you've done.
Exactly that. So now you're going to see a much more focused delivery of work from me. That is the direction that I want to take my work. That doesn't mean that I don't enjoy the other things that I did loads of. I'm just not going to be splattering it all over the internet like I used to.
And obviously, it wouldn't be one of my podcasts at all without some pessimism. I do like some joyful pessimism. I am very much English. And I actually thought something that would be quite interesting is to just kind of discuss some of the lessons that you learn in photography the hard way. So obviously we're a YouTube generation. Everyone just learns everything through someone else's experience. I don't as much anymore, but I used to watch hours upon hours upon hours of people on YouTube doing photography and then kind of use what I saw as my own experience and go from there, which sometimes sells you a bit short because you don't really learn the lessons the way that you should. But I was wondering if there's anything in photography that you've kind of learnt mid-shoot or you've had to learn the hard way, the way out of or whatever. Yeah.
So the biggest one, I kind of touched on it before. I've shot 2 shoots on JPEG instead of RAW. And I still to this day don't know how I managed to change my camera settings without knowing from shooting RAW to JPEG. The first time I did it was a massively heartbreaking experience on a portfolio builder with an event that you put on about 2 years ago, I think. And the second one, you think once you've done it once, you learn the lesson straight away. But I managed to do it again 6 months later on an outdoor shoot as well. That's one of the things that is now the first thing I check on my camera at the start of every shoot is there space on the memory card? Do I have enough memory cards? And am I shooting to RAW and not JPEG? Goes without saying. I've also, one of the most devastating experiences I've had learning to shoot film over the course of the last 12 months as well. I did a brilliant shoot and I knew that every single shot on this 15 shot roll of 645 medium format film was absolutely brilliant and I couldn't wait to get it back from the lab. And the cut and short of it was I hadn't wound it on properly, so it didn't catch. So every shot I was taking, it was winding on and taking the shot, but it wasn't actually advancing the film. So I'm now a hell of a lot more cautious about loading film as well. So they're the 2 biggest ones that kind of knackered 3 separate shoots. They're the things that I learned the hard way that were catastrophic. I
think for me, the first one that I guess is the freshest right now is just getting rid of shoots, raw files of shoots that I just didn't think I needed anymore. And, now finding myself in a position, especially with what's going on, to be like, I'd really like to have that back so I could, go over the raws, give them a better edit, and they would work quite nicely in the portfolio right now. I mean, it's not always good to kind of harp back to, the glory days of photography for yourself when, actually you were able to do it and you were doing half decent. But there are definitely some shoots that I've done. There's one in particular with a model that no longer works at all in the industry. And I absolutely love the images I got with them and they are long gone. So that's very frustrating. A couple of really hard lessons I've learned over the years. I guess the most obvious, I think I've talked about it on the podcast before, which wasn't particularly comfortable for me to do, but was a wedding shoot, or shooting a wedding years ago, not a wedding shoot, but actually shooting a wedding years ago, when it was on a really stormy day down the south coast, and there, the rain had passed and everything had calmed down. I'm thinking, like every dickhead does in tornadoes, where they think it's all done and they go outside and they get sucked up because they're in the eye of the storm. I went out with the couple's rings to go and take some really nice pictures. Hang on, bear with me. You're not allowed to gasp just yet. I went out to photograph the rings on these huge, rain-soaked leaves that had a sunset behind them. And the images were really nice images on a Sigma 20mm at 1.4. So really wide shot, but really close focusing. It's a really, I love the images. But the problem was, like I say, it was the eye of the storm. And we basically, I think I took about 20 photos and then it just exploded with wind. And I caught one ring and caught two and then couldn't see another one. And yeah, so I had to scramble to try and find this. What turned out to be the engagement ring was the one that got away, the one with a diamond, because I'm lucky. And, after some arsehole biting trouser, sort of 10 minutes, my wife Jamila actually found it under some leaves and kind of escaped it. But the bride and groom had found out what had happened in the meantime. So that ended up costing me a lot of money. Which, I wasn't sort of obligated to do, but I felt really bad that I'd given them something to worry about on their wedding day. So sometimes, no matter how good you think the shot is, sometimes you do have to take safety into account, especially when it comes to diamonds. That was a hard lesson to learn. Oh. I'll tell you what, another one I learned years ago was to photograph people that kind of suit the style of shoot that you're doing. So if you're booking a portrait shoot, if you're booking a model in for a portrait shoot, make sure they fit the idea. I think I went through a bit of a phase of, because people were available, I would shoot them. And I look back on some of the images that I took and Jesus fucking Christ. Like, I'm sad the internet exists because I know that they can still be found. And as hard as I've tried to scrub them from the internet, they are still out there. So I think kind of going through a phase of really enjoying photography and taking some awful pictures of people that just didn't fit what I was trying to do. Yeah, I should have been a bit more selective at the time.
I've done that before. And actually, every now and again, I might get one or two half decent images out of it. But more than anything, actually, I feel really bad on the models because, you might be booking them for one type of work when they themselves are actually more renowned and more comfortable for a different type of work. And you've got to be really careful that they themselves don't feel like there's some sort of, like they're doing something wrong when actually it's me that's made the mistake because I booked them for the wrong thing. Yeah. And I find that it's much harder work to get their confidence up. I've had an experience on an event that I put on for myself and for other photographers. And the model came as a recommendation. She wasn't someone that I'd worked with, but her reputation was more for figure nude kind of work rather than fashion portraiture. And to be fair to her, she worked really hard and we did get some good images, but there's that constant rowing it back, just relax your pose a little bit. We don't need to see that kind of figure stance in this type of image. And it made me very aware actually that must have been incredibly hard for her. And so, yeah, you're quite right. It's important to get the right model for the right job. And it's important for them as well, because more than anything, I don't want them to feel uncomfortable or feel that they're doing something wrong either. It's not fair on them.
I mean, how do you go about dealing with that on the shoot? Because I've always argued that the worst thing you can say when someone's trusting you with their self-esteem in front of a camera is to just tell them they're doing a bad job. You obviously can't go down that route, but you've got to have something in the way of assertiveness so that you're not just wasting frames and building expectations that something's going to be good when it just isn't and it needs adapting. So how do you go about changing that?
So hypothetical scenario, I might kind of shoot a few frames, show them the back of the camera and say, John, I really like what you're doing here. Can we just try doing this? And then when they do that, if I get it right, I'll show them the back of the camera and say, that looks absolutely brilliant. Can we keep along with that theme a little bit more and explore that a little bit more? Just to give them, without tearing them down, giving them a nudge, this is the direction that I want to take it. I've found that that's quite effective more often than not. Though it's only happened to me twice where I've booked the wrong model. 100% hit rate.
I'm gonna I'm gonna throw out a really good tip that Karl Ferris threw at me, which was when I said to him about shooting portraits of models. And one of my things is working through poses. So sometimes on digital, you might take 30 photos. Over the course of that 30 photos in a set, you are maneuvering them towards the one that you want. Now with film, especially medium format, you can't shoot 30 photos and then kind of throw 29 of them away to get the one that you want. I mean, you can, but fucking hell, is that an expensive endeavor? And he said to me that the great thing to do, and I think he stole this from someone else, but maybe not, is to always have a camera with 35mm on you. And then when stuff isn't quite kind of where you want it to go, you use that as your work through. I'm pretty sure he even said to me about not putting film in it, which I thought was fucking hilarious. But yeah, using like the 35mm, because obviously in terms of the cost of the film and so on, and the amount of frames that you get, it's a lot better. I mean, I'm struggling right now with shooting 645, just only having 15 shots. I'm a momentum shooter. I like to kind of work at speed, and having 15 shots, and then because I'm completely cack-handed and I've got arthritis, like changing up the film to continue it adds another 5 minutes, and the momentum feels like it's lost and stuff. I know that you've made a bit of a move over the last, I don't know how long, but you've made a bit of a move towards film with your lovely Mamiya. So what was it that kind of spurred that on?
So I'll come to that. I'll just touch on the point you made as well about doing the shoot through on 35mm that Karl mentioned. I actually do similar, but with my digital. So I kind of get a lot of that out of the way with digital, so that I can kind of save some of the best work for film. But I've also started to recognize that no matter how much I set aside half an hour or an hour before I even pick the camera up just to chat to the model and get to know them and build a bit of rapport, especially if it's someone I've not worked with before, generally speaking, my experience is that the first set isn't going to be the best. So the first set is generally a warm-up, and actually it's the later sets where I expect to get the images that I will share and the ones that I will use. Very rare will I post anything from the first set on a shoot.
Well, that's funny. That actually kind of matches up with something I saw years ago on a Pro EDU tutorial with Michael Volchinovic, where he said that when he does like a model test, he'll shoot a set in whatever they're wearing when they turn up before they've had their makeup done and so on, because it kind of relaxes them. It gets you both on the same tempo, the same timing in terms of expectations for the shoot. And every once in a while, it will throw up a gem of a wonderful portrait, but that's not the intention.
Exactly that, yeah. And I think certainly over the last 12 months, I'd expect as almost like a value added thing that I should get 2 to 3 images from every set, and actually accepting that I'm not going to get that from the first set, and to use the set productively to get warmed up and to get the model confident working with me and me confident working with the model, to build your communication, to find a rhythm in terms of working with each other, as you said. I find it a much more productive use of time to use that first set in that way. And at that point, that's when I'll start to move onto film and shooting more film. So
yeah, what was it that made you make that right angle turn and head towards Film Alley?
I actually wanted to shoot less images. So I would go on a shoot and I would fill 3 memory cards, which is just a disaster. And, at the time it was very much a lack of experience. I'd sit there and think I need a lack of experience, and I think a lack of confidence. I don't think I had the confidence that I would get the shot that I needed without taking lots and lots and lots and lots of images. That's the fallback with digital. You've kind of got infinite space almost. You can take as many shots as you want, and a couple of them are going to be okay. And I just found it really unproductive, because once you put them onto your computer, you've got to trawl through them all, and you've got to find the keepers. And I just wasn't confident that I was getting the best work out of myself by taking that many images, and I wanted to slow it down. Now, I'm not disciplined enough to limit each set to 30 images. I'm just not. Why should I need to? The reason I wanted to limit the number of shots that I was taking was not just to take less, but to be more efficient with the shots that I was taking. So, shooting less, but getting more quality images. And someone suggested shooting film. So I started with a 35 millimeter camera, 36 exposures, and it really did help, but it kind of became a real fascination with film. I'm not going to subscribe to this film looks better, or, there's nothing you can do in digital that you can't do on film. I'm not subscribed to that kind of aesthetic argument. I just found that I enjoyed the process. I enjoyed the anticipation of seeing the images, once they've been developed, and it just snowballed. And from the 35 mil, I started using a Mamiya 645. The chap that I bought it from initially talked me down from buying a Mamiya 6x7, and very kindly let me borrow a 645 for a whole year, which was a great experience. But again, only 15 shots, really made sure that I had to slow down and be a lot more considered about what I was taking. You can't just snap away indiscriminately and hope that one of them's good, because it's a complete waste of money. And that really helped slow down my process. And in the space of time that I was using that smaller Mamiya 645, I did notice that my shot count on digital decreased rapidly. So, this is going to sound really amateurish, but 18 months ago, my shot count at the end of a shoot was probably close to 1,400, which is just obscene. I will be very surprised if I come away with 250 shots from a 4-hour shoot now.
I mean, you're talking wedding numbers there, really, when it comes to what you were shooting before.
Exactly. It's absolutely pointless in many respects, because I would still only edit maybe 20 shots out of all of that. Whereas now I'm getting the same 20 shots, but from a fraction of the amount of frames. And that was the real objective. Now, as I said, I know that you can be more disciplined with a digital camera. You don't need to go the long-winded process that I took. But I really got into that long-winded process because I enjoyed it. I enjoy using the cameras. I love the feel of them, the waist level viewfinder. I like the manual feel of the crank. I enjoy it. And that's kind of why I've stuck at it, and have since upgraded from the 645. And I have since got the 6x7, which without a shadow of a doubt, as a tool to do a job, it's my favorite tool in my toolbox without a question.
We're both fans of older portraiture and older fashion photography, for sure.
Yeah.
And we've been talking at length recently about like Peter Lindbergh and so on. Just talking from the outside, and obviously it's a very scary thing to criticize, because people will just immediately come back at us and our body of work. But do you feel like, I don't want to say something really cliche like the soul, but do you feel like the energy of fashion photography and portraiture has kind of been lost in a lot of ways over the last maybe 5 or 6 years, purely down to people looking Instagram for a more and more clinical, an Instagram look, basically?
Yes, I do. And, that's not me criticizing anyone else who's creating that content. I create that content. I am just as guilty. And it's interesting, I look at people like Peter Lindbergh, and I would love to create work that has that look and feel to it. There's nothing stopping me doing that and trying and learning and practicing. But I'm just not disciplined enough. No matter how much I say I'm going to do this, I always end up reverting back to type. And I think it's because that's what, a limited number of people know me for. That's what people approach me to collaborate with or to do shoots for. And I think one of the things that I'm looking forward to next year is almost being selfish, actually, and really making sure that if I set my mind to doing a project, I'm actually going to do it, not for anybody else, not for Instagram, but actually for me, because I want to develop into that direction. Because you're quite right. There's a certain aesthetic and a look and a feel that you see on social media that is so far removed from some of the photographers, of the fashion photographers, especially of the 80s and 90s. For me, that's my favorite era of photography. The likes of Herb Ritts and Peter Lindbergh, these guys really kind of pioneered fashion photography in that era. Some of my favorite images are Calvin Klein ads from the sort of mid-90s. They're so far removed from that. And yet I find images of that era completely timeless, black and white, beautiful images. Whereas I think Instagram generally tends to chase trends.
Yeah.
And as I said, I'm guilty of that as well.
Yeah, definitely about chasing trends, but it also feels like there's a clinicalness to it where it's almost a paint by numbers situation where, even if you're off trend, you still have to tick certain boxes. Even really sort of fantastic photographers that I've spoken to, over the course of this year have said to me that they won't post certain things because it's not like Insta friendly, or it's not going to garner as many likes. And to be honest with you, it's a little bit of me is always, the kid in me is always let down a little bit by that, because I want photographers or whatever, whether it be musicians or whatever, to be more focused on their voice than on, pleasing an audience or trying to please as many people as possible. I'd much rather, something brave was being posted and, maybe not getting as many of the bots liking it, but at the same time, it has more of the DNA of the photographer.
I actually had someone message me one of my own images on Instagram saying, you do realize the reason this one hasn't got as many likes as your other photos is because the person in the photo is too far away. You'll find that your close-up shots will do better. And I thought, okay, fair enough. This person's taken the time to give me that feedback, fair enough. But it also got me thinking, who really thinks that much about what an image looks like on Instagram? Because I'd never really considered in that level of detail what I was posting on Instagram.
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree with you, except for the fact that one thing I've learned with the podcast is the contrary, is that people seem to really think about it, and they seem to treat Instagram like a pretty big factor in all of their decision making, which I find, like I said, I find it to be a little bit, obviously it's everyone's choice. And if I find someone and I like their work, then that factoring in shouldn't actually bother me because I've still found their work and I still enjoy it. But I just feel like I just wish it wasn't a factor. I just wish it was something that people didn't take as seriously as what they do. And I know that's a selfish thing to say, but to me, and this is a completely unfair criticism, but to me, it feels like if you are releasing something because it's likely to garner more attention, it's not really you releasing your work. You're just releasing what other people will like.
Yeah. So the image that, I received the feedback about, I posted that because I liked it. And I felt that in a series of 3 images, it worked quite well as a panel of 3 images. That was my motivation for posting it. I just found it quite cynical that someone recognized that it didn't get as many likes, and their explanation was that it was effectively a full length and not a headshot.
Which is bizarre for someone to take that much interest in someone else's work.
Yeah.
No, I've got the cynicism out of me. Let's turn back and make this a little bit more positive. I have to feel the quota,
Yeah.
Obviously, right now, very uncertain times, blah, 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 the new normal, all the other bullshit cliches that everyone's been throwing around for 9 months, hoping that they were wrong. But we've got an uncertain time ahead of us. But, the world keeps spinning and we have to keep moving forwards. And a lot of that is planning, especially for people that are working in creative industries or people that do creative endeavors in their free time, planning what your next step is. So, what do you kind of have on the horizon that you're hoping to achieve over the next, say, year or 2 years?
Well, so I'm hoping this year will be COVID free. And there's a few things that I want to do. So we talked a little bit before about some of those great photographers of the 80s and 90s and some of the inspiration that I want to really pull upon this year. One of the big things for me will be to do a project, a coffee table book. It's not anything that's going to be published. It's something that I'm really excited about, just as a record of my own work, which will be largely black and white. But I really want to try and pull upon the inspiration of people like Peter Lindbergh and, looking at more modern versions of that kind of work in Agatha Serge and really tell a story in black and white images. That's something that I'm really passionate about doing this year. So that's the big thing. In terms of other things this year, I really wanted to do more landscapes. I really enjoyed doing more landscapes in 2019, and this year I'd hope to do more. But obviously, the current circumstances have put a stop to that. So that's something that I want to pick up again next year. Other things that I've got going on. A couple of people have asked about things like workshops and tuition. I'm still undecided on that, to be honest, Kris. I don't know if I've got the knowledge to to share with people that would make it worthwhile for them. That's got to be an important. I appreciate a vote of confidence, dude. But yeah, that's still something that I'm kind of weighing up at the moment. I think if I feel confident enough to do it and enough people want it, then that's something that I'll do in the summer as well. But something else that I'm really excited about, I've been asked to work more closely with an photography events company that do really cool fashion and themed events for photographers throughout the year. Have you ever heard of the Creativity Hub?
Yeah, from you and a couple other people, yeah.
Yeah, so they've really kindly asked me to jump in and do some events next year. So I'll be helping host an event in May down on the South Coast. More information on that's going to be out later in January, but I'm really, really excited about that and hope that anybody listening will be able to have a look at the Creativity Hub page in January and find out more about that as well. How about you? So what have you got on for the year?
I mean, I'm definitely hoping I can get back to shooting weddings fairly regularly, because I really feel like the way weddings work and the way that I kind of take them on really helps me fine tune certain things. And I'm always kind of using it as an opportunity to spin plates and work on stuff that's not quite sharp enough from the last wedding or whatever. You can use it to improve your portrait work and so on. So hoping to get a bit more consistency, because this year I shot 12 weddings, and for most people that I know of, that seems to be fairly normal, but I was scheduled to shoot about 62, and obviously that's a huge drop off. I think fairly similarly to you, I would love to do something that kind of documents, kind of draws a line under a period of work that I've done. I'd like to shoot more film, purely because I think it's exposing some of the shitness of my photography, and I don't have anywhere to hide with it, so I have to get better. So I definitely hope to do that. And just generally speaking, it would be nice I would definitely like to photograph more men. That was a big thing for this year. Obviously the year's been what it has been, so I haven't had as much opportunity as I would have liked, but definitely shooting more men, and probably branching more into photographing like actors and male models is a big deal for me as well.
Do you know, it's funny you say that. I've often found it more enjoyable and easier to work with male models, but it is so hard to find talented male models to work with. I don't know is that just me, or do you have that problem as well?
I think it's hard to find male models that show up. Like before you even get to the talent, just finding ones that would even turn up when they say they will. That's usually the trouble. I've had probably 5 over the years that have not been a letdown at some point, which is saying something, considering I've been doing this since 2013 and, worked with agencies where I've had countless letdowns of male models. One hilarious story with a bellend that was on Love Island that thought he was like God's gift to everything, which I should probably tell that story one day on the podcast, because he's still fucking messaging people about me, which is quite funny. But yeah, just having the ones that actually turn up, turn up with the right attitude, turn up ready to go. When you do get to work with someone that's like a talented male model or a talented actor, it's actually just so much fun. Yeah, completely. Because you're kind of, Instagram and weird modern feminism stuff has kind of led to this weird place where a lot of the fun of photographing women has been taken away because of, the kind of, I wouldn't say restrictions, but the restricted view that people have of photographing women, the restricted view that people have of retouching and so on. It makes it sort of an eggshell walking exercise rather than always being something that's as much fun. And do you know what? On a weirdly pessimistic subject for me, especially, but I definitely think like over the last year and a half, 2 years, but definitely in the last 6 months, it's gone up like tenfold, is the damage that things like OnlyFans have done to the photographic industry, in the sense that photographers are now treated like dog's bodies. A friend of mine referred to photography or photographers as middlemen now that they have an OnlyFans, which I think kind of sums up like the attitude towards photography now, is that, it's men with cameras that are no longer required because people can sell phone selfies. And it's like, that was never the point to begin with. Do you think that's more a reflection on the individual's viewpoint, or do you think that is a more widely held view of models? I think it's becoming more and more widely held. I'm not saying it's everybody, because, this isn't communist Russia. It's not like everything is nothing is ever everything, but it's definitely something that I'm seeing more and more of. I'm seeing more and more people who make their money out of the way that they look, having an issue with people paying attention to the way they look, which I find infinitely bizarre. And I spend most of my time now, especially when it comes to looking on like Instagram, I spend most of my time feeling like an alien, like I'm observing humanity for the first time. And I'm just trying to figure out what the fuck is going on, because there's so many people that do so many things that kind of contradict, their position, that I find it hard to even figure out what's going on. But I definitely feel like there's an attitude towards photography, and maybe it's an attitude that's been created by, photographers of past days who weren't particularly wonderful people, which is entirely possible. But it definitely feels like there's a bit of a movement towards photographers being an unnecessary distraction. Whereas, a great photographer, an invested photographer, an inspired photographer is wonderful. It's a great thing to see. And I really like looking at other photographers' work. It's the whole point of the podcast, is to kind of generate more buzz around that and thank people for the work they do and so on. I just think that generally it's undervalued. I
think photography is undervalued. I think you're quite right. I don't just think it's OnlyFans though. I think Instagram has also played a part in that as well. But I also think that some of the really, really talented photographers will never struggle to find really great people to work with. I think of some of the best photographers that I've seen. They've not got particularly big Instagram followings. And I often kind of wonder, why is it that this supremely talented individual has hardly got any followers, yet there are other photographers, let's say, that might regularly feature on meme pages like trendy photography memes that have infinitely bigger followings? And it doesn't take. I think
before you carry on, I do just want to give a big shout out to trendy photography memes, because that's been a hilarious distraction this year. That page rules.
Absolutely. And, it doesn't take a genius to work out some of those accounts, why they're bigger versus, some more talented people. And, I find it astonishing. Some of these people's Instagram pages don't actually do justice to how talented they are, but how big they are in the industry. And as I say, I think the really talented people will always find some really cool people to work with. And I think, for me, that motivates me to stay sharp, I guess.
I mean, I agree to an extent, but I think that the disrespect of photography goes a little bit beyond, Instagram. I think it's just it seems to be more of a general way of thinking around the way that images are created, because it's now on a phone. So many people think it's so easy to do what photographers do. But I had an experience last week with an agency I've worked with for years, got in contact, said they had some people they wanted me to photograph. After a really laborious email chain, we finally got something sorted. The model turned up. So it's a test shoot. The model turned up with nothing to wear. So I had to go out, literally run over, go buy some stuff that we could use for this shoot. We do the shoot. I think we got some really nice images. I send the images back to the agency and I let them know that, I wasn't particularly impressed by the lack of communication on their part. And their only response to me was, do I have a certain image in color? There was no apology for the inconvenience. There was no acknowledgement of the inconvenience. It was just, what else can they get from me? And I think maybe it's just a case that I'm not a particularly respect-worthy photographer, but I'm definitely seeing it with other people as well, where it doesn't feel like it's a respected industry.
I think that there's too many people that have been paid for too long in that really, really valuable currency you hear often mentioned, exposure.
Yeah.
And I think it's those people that have cheapened the industry because people will exploit that, and they know that there is someone who will do it for nothing, effectively. So when really talented photographers come along and say, these are my rates, a lot of these companies will say, this guy will do it for nothing. And I think that is a huge part of why photographers at the moment are undervalued, is because there are too many people doing it for free.
Yeah. And not valuing themselves. And that's a big problem, because if you, I think there was a really good saying by Sue Bryce years ago, And I cannot remember the whole thing for the life of me. So it's like when a dad tells a joke at a party when he's halfway gone, but essentially saying that if you lower the water in the port, every boat has to come down, which, if everyone's undervaluing themselves, it means that, photographers that don't, undervalue themselves will just be ignored because, across the spectrum of photography, you'll just be seen as overpricing yourself or overvaluing yourself because so many people are selling themselves short.
Completely. And it's a learning experience that I hope most people will learn. I certainly did. The first commercial jobs that I did for that famed currency exposure. And in some instances, it got me a foot in the door, and I've been able to submit invoices since then. But even when I started submitting invoices, I almost felt embarrassed to ask for what I thought I was worth. And my invoices were quite small up until, I would say, January this year. I was actually inquired for a full day rate for a particular project, a particularly big project for this organization. And I put in a much, much higher day rate. I thought they might say no. I was a bit nervous that they might. And they said yes. They booked me for 2 days there and then. And it taught me that actually I might not see that value in what I do, but they clearly did, that they felt it would be worth what I thought was an impossible dream. So I changed my rates from there on. And I had 6 bookings off the back of that, which was absolutely brilliant. And then COVID, brilliant. But again, the groundwork is now there. I won't put my rates down again, having had them there. And, I think for anybody worried about giving their day rates at a certain value, don't be. You have to see the value in your own work, otherwise nobody else will.
I think that's exactly should be the message to take away from all of this. We need to give people all of your links so they can go and find your work. So where's the best place for people to find you?
So I've got a couple of pages. I've got my website, which is lifelikephoto.co.uk. You can also find me on Instagram with lifelikephotography_UK. And if anyone's interested in kind of following me along as I learn a bit more about film and how to shoot more film and get into grips with this new camera, please feel free to give me a follow there as well on Anthony Robert 82.
Well, thank you very much. I actually just want to say something before we end, which is something that's been really underappreciated over the course of this year, something that's gone completely under the radar while people focus on the doom and gloom of statistics and lockdowns and so on, is the damage that's kind of being done in terms of mental health. I think that something that's really been either completely ignored or misdiagnosed is a really impending mental health crisis that we are facing because of kids being left at home, not socializing properly, people not being able to socialize properly, people feeling like they don't know where the next lockdown or the next big issue is coming from, people struggling to pay bills and so on. And just generally speaking, the negativity of the world that we've been in for the last 10 months, I'd say in England, but it could be a bit longer or a bit less for people in other places. Supporting people through difficult times is something that A, people don't do enough, and B, the ones that do don't get enough consideration and enough thanks. So for people that don't know, I'm not going to go into this because it's not in my repertoire to play my own violin, but I'm someone that suffered for years with crippling depression, and this year's been particularly bad for me. And I actually want to say a big thank you to you because over the past few months, you've really been one of the few people that's really stepped up, checked in on me. You've made sure that, you were available to talk. We've had some really great Zoom chats about how stupid everyone is and sports and everything other than what everyone's talking about constantly. And for anyone that is listening, I'd encourage you to be like Anthony and be one of those people that if you know someone is struggling, or if there's someone out there that seems a little bit off their game, check in with them, see if they're okay, see if they want to chat. And it doesn't have to be they have to spill their guts. They don't have to lean on you like a de facto psychologist, but just having a chat with someone, giving someone a distraction can actually mean the world. So I'd like to say a big thank you for that. It's not been unnoticed. It's not been underappreciated, I promise.
Dude, it's been my absolute pleasure. And, more than anything, I think at times like these, no one should ever get left behind. And, you're someone who has helped me and taught me a huge amount over the last 2 or 3 years. And yeah, I'm not leaving you behind, dude.